Good morning. We are reviewing and summarizing the conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis. We are in volume 3 on page 1452. Actually, 1451, bottom of 1451, I should say. Last line of 1451. So I've already reviewed a number of times what we've learned the last few days, but briefly, the discussion of the neshamas as they come down below and the support that they get, namely here through the malachim, the angels, their ava v'yira, which is why we say birchas yetzer, the blessing of yetzer before Shema, where we talk about the malachim, the angels. So that has two functions. One, it helps prime and warm up, you can say, to make the animal soul more receptive to the message of Hashem Echad and Shema, because the angels and the malachim and the merkava are the root of the nefesh habamis, like we learned earlier. And a second function, because the malachim, especially in time of Golus, they carry the ava v'yira and they distribute it, so to speak, and deliver it to neshamas below. So it's also the nefesh halakis also benefits from the malachim. It's not just for the nefesh habamis, as we also learned. But then comes the main avodah, as he said. That's a siyua. That's a support. That's a preparation, akdama. But the actual work, the real avodah is in Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Shema Yisrael, Neshamas Yisrael, when they say Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, when they contemplate on Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, that in turn, that unity, as we learn that length, Ma'arich Ba'echad, ultimately has the power to also affect the animal soul to reach the state of Ahavtas Hashem Elokecha, B'chol Levavcha B'shnei Yetzerecha, loving God with both sides of the heart, including the Yetzer Hara, the animal soul, the Yetzer Hara. And now, in continuing, and that in turn elevates also the malachim. So as much as the malachim help the neshamas in turn help elevate the malachim. That began the section on page 1451 that we're middle of, which is Achalti Ya'ari im divshi. I've eaten my honeycomb with my honey. That refers to the birchas yetzer is the honeycomb, and the divshi, the honey, is Shema. What's the connection between Shema and honey? So he's been explaining, because there's bonus of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, for it to really have its proper effect and to turn into Vahafta, to loving God, requires that it shouldn't be a dry and detached his bonus, but one that is filled with chayis and einig, as he put it, vitality and pleasure. And we learned that in detail what that meant. So it's not just enough understanding Hashem Echad, but there should be a chayis in it, a vitality and a pleasure and a satisfaction. And that's what really turns it into a true lasting ava. So you need both. You need the contemplation, and you need also that the contemplation be not in a detached, what he called, the words he used was that it can be as bonus bekrirus, cold or apathetic. Then the parentheses, which was the last thing we learned, was a more elaborate discussion by explaining that it's more than just the fact that you have a contemplation, and that contemplation is done with vitality and energy and passion. But the truth is, like he says, be'emes, every neshama lekis, every divine soul, has naturally and inherently a tam va'enig and elikus. In other words, it's not something that is completely, what's the word I want to say? Completely manufactured. It's not acquired. That's the word. Not acquired. It's inherent. However, its inherent can be also dormant and concealed, like he speaks in Tanya Ava Misuteres. Doesn't use that word here, but he says Yesh lo tam va'enig, and that's indeed the reason it actually understands godliness. So as we explained at length, this is not a contradiction to what he said till now. It's coming to explain that in addition to the fact that contemplation leads to an ava, because when you contemplate on something, you appreciate it, and especially with the chayis and tainug and oinig, that brings to a love and attraction being drawn to it. We have another element here, that neshamas actually have it, like he explained on the previous page, that neshama mitzaratzma, even without the malachim, even without anything, a neshama just by nature is part of godliness. Chelik elikam mamish in the language of Tanya, bonim atem lashem elikechem, we're a child, like a child has from the very energy of the DNA of the father. So he explained in the parentheses more detail of how that works. So there is that, the neshama has that inherently. And b'meila, that is what causes it to really appreciate or can understand godliness. In other words, if it didn't have it, could you understand God if you didn't have a natural connection or a natural taste, so to speak, in godliness? So hypothetically, of course you could. Because listen, every human being, you have to say every human being has also as a tzelem Elokim, is created in the divine image. So it's not really a good example. I have to think about it a bit more. But hypothetically, you could say that someone with a mind can come to appreciate that we're created by God and appreciate godliness and have some form of connection. But obviously, it's not comparable to someone who actually has it inherently already within them. And he goes on to explain that this is that the hasaga of seichel, the tam and seichel, comes from the tam of einig. I'm just summing up the parentheses quickly here. And if he didn't have a tam, he wouldn't really have a hasaga in it. Now, there could be a scenario where a person has that inherent connection, like a simple person who's not educated, not literate, what he called anoshim pshutim, or an amaya aretz. So they don't have they don't have an understanding of godliness, but they still have that connection. I gave the example of Simchas Torah. They can dance and they can take pleasure in godliness, but they don't have that saga, because the saga, like he said, is keiches hanefesh. Keiches hanefesh means it's something that you have to develop. It could be a faculty, but you have to bring it out. Chachma Bina. Whereas the etzem hanefesh, einig, is connected to etzem hanefesh, and that's there in every neshama. Whereas keiches hanefesh could be that it's not bizgalus, it's not revealed, meaning it's not actualized. But when there is then he goes on. But when there is seichel v'hasag v'elikus, yesh negamkin la'atam v'einig. So here in this case, it's not originating as seichel; it's originating because there's a natural connection. So when there is seichel, there's also the tam v'einig, which allows the seichel to understand godliness. And that's why, and here's how he explains it, and that's why, that when you don't have chayis and einig in the hasaga, that tells you that the comprehension is not really emes, amitis. He doesn't really understand it well. So before the parentheses, he said that if a person doesn't have chayis and einig, it's not going to bring ta'ava. Now he's going further. That if a person really doesn't have a chayis ve'einig, it means he didn't really understand it well. Either because he didn't concentrate, didn't apply himself completely, or because he's not a keli for it. There's something beyond him. And then he concludes the last piece, or the few more things I'll say, that there is a number of levels in this, all depending on how much you apply yourself. When the hasaga is more superficial, then the chayis and einig will be more diminished. And the more he goes deeper into it, the more he understands the depth of the inner dimension, the more there'll be the vitality and pleasure. Because that comes, ikra einig comes from previous Bina. So therefore, that's and that's up to us already. So the fact that every neshama has a divine connection and therefore has tam v'einig, that still doesn't tell you that it's really manifesting in ava. You still need this bonus, because this bonus activates and you contemplate on Hashem Echad. That in turn helps you appreciate the tam v'einig that is naturally there in the neshama. It's now been ignited and triggered, As a result, there's the avos. So the more the hasaga is beprimius, the more there'll be chayes ve'enig. When it's only chitzenius, then it won't be quite the same level. So you see here that even when it's inherently within us, it's still not an automatic deal that automatically a person has chayes and einig and avos Hashem. That requires the avodah of contemplating on Hashem echad with chayes and einig. But he did add that additional dimension that we have it naturally even before we start the contemplation, but that needs to now be activated. That's why we also need the malachim, even though we have it on our own, because it's concealed. And there's a guf and nefesh abamis to contend with. And that's where we stopped at the bottom of page, 1451. We'll now continue at the bottom of the page, unless anyone wants to ask something about what I just reviewed. So the last line on page 1451, and the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com if you want to follow along the text, if you don't have the sefer itself. So he says like this, V'zeu shekosov. So really, this goes back to prior to the parentheses, but you'll see clearly he's referring to points that he made in the parentheses. Not uncommon. Generally speaking, a parentheses, you should be able to skip the parentheses and just go from before the parentheses to afterwards. But here it does help, as you'll see, because it brought it all together. The parentheses is not always completely parenthetical. Sometimes parentheses is just more explanation of what we learned. So she says, this is what it says, Eim habonim smecha. Literally means the mother of the children, smecha, is rejoicing, is celebrating, simcha. Now, what is it? That's on a very basic level. A mother is celebrating her children. But Chassidus explains, Kabbalah Chassidus explain, Eim goes on Bina. And Bonim goes on the midas, the emotions that are born through the contemplation of Bina. We learned there also earlier about Shiluach HaKan, when it's called Eim Revetzes Al Efrochim, the mother, as she nurtures the midas, her fledglings, her babies, essentially, her children. She says, the B'chdei Tia HaBina. So you see here, he's referring to Bina. Bina was in the parentheses. We didn't talk about Bina before the parentheses. So obviously that helps. Just a second, I want to see one thing. 1 second, I wanted to see. Okay, so he says like this. The B'chdei Tia Bina b'chinas Eim habonim. For Bina, the mother, to become a mother of children, which is the pasuk Eim habonim, not just she's a mother, not she's just an individual, but she's to be a mother of bonim, which means sheyiyah leidas hamidas min hasaga. Next page, 1452, which means to be a mother of children means a mother has given birth to children. In Ruchnius, that means that Bina has given birth. The hasaga of Bina has given birth to midas. Zeu dafki alidei simcha. So this is how he's teaching the pasuk, not telling us a statement or a fact that the mother of the children is rejoicing or is happy, but in order for her to be Eim habonim, she needs simcha. Eim habonim smecha. So the smecha, the simcha, what he's calling simcha here is like tam v'oinig, that there's more than just giving birth, that she's in a state of happiness and essentially vitality, what he called earlier, vitchayis, einig, tam. That's what causes the birth of midas. Remember, he said that you can't have true ava mitis, if you don't have tam v'einig, if the abundance is just dry. What he added in the parentheses that every neshama has a fundamental connection, but you still have to bring it alive. You have to still bring it into. You have to still bring it. You have to still reveal it. You have to still express it. So the hisbonenus of Bina requires simcha tam v'einig in order to give birth to Eim habonim, to become a Eim habonim. Uksiv, Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha, and the pasuk says, serve Hashem with joy. Sheyil chayis ve'enig. So here he's connecting simcha to chayis and einig. Sometimes there's a distinction between einig and simcha, Shabbos and Yom Tov. There is distinction, but in broader terms, it's all about doing something with a passion, with a excitement, with a pnimius, not just doing it mechanically, basically, but doing it with a simcha. But he calls here chayis ve'enig. Or I should add, sheyeh lechayis ve'enig gadol ba'elakus hamusig. They should have great vitality and pleasure in the elikus, in the godliness that he's comprehending. So the simcha, he's teaching here, musig, because we're talking about a simcha that's coming through contemplation, but not just contemplation that is with passion and with all the vitality we're discussing here. A dynamic contemplation, if you wish. For who? And what does that consist of? Kasher hasogi be'emiku pnimius ha'inyan. Like he said at the end of the parentheses, when the comprehension in the thing you're thinking about, in this case it's Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, is in depth, is with a depth and a pnimius, inward. In other words, it's not just superficial or outer. It's you're piercing and immersing yourself deeply into the inyan, or mekash ba'inyan, in the depth and in the inner dimensions of this topic that you're contemplating on, and the person who's contemplating is binding himself by inyan. He's binding to it. It's not just reading or studying it. He's connecting to it. Kasha literally means to bind yourself. Like we talked before, kasha sometimes is Daas, but he was not talking about necessarily Daas. He's just saying means he completely immerses himself, completely enters into the inyan. It's like when sometimes you read something quickly or superficially, shallow, and then you move on. But there are times you immerse yourself, you completely submerge yourself within the inyan. And he brings close that idea, this divine concept. He brings close to himself, that it should be by him upgelegt well. In Yiddish is an expression. It means it should resonate well. It should be settled. It should be integrated, internalized. All that is the word. Hanocha literally means to place. But hanocha teva here means to place it in a way that enters fully, so to speak. Ubanocha pnimius. So hanocha teva means a good to upleg, a good integration, a proper integration, and pnocha pnimius means an internalized one. So bottom line, it's true connecting between you and the concept. The concept does not remain detached from you, but you're completely immersed. Literally, like we say, somebody goes into a mikveh, or we say kamayim layom molar deis Hashem kamayim layom chasam, like the waters cover the sea, that you're completely covered with the idea. You've completely immersed yourself in this inyan eliki. That's a true asaga pnimius. And Oz, when a person has that, and that, of course, is directly connected to chayes v'tainik, because if you did it mechanically, you wouldn't apply yourself to this extent. Very clear that this is part of the chayes v'tainik. Oz, when a person has that, yismach benafshe ala inyan eliki, then he will rejoice, his nefesh will rejoice, this inyan eliki. Not just he'll understand it, not just he'll appreciate it, but it will be with joy, celebrating. V'yisanig benafshe. And his nefesh, he will take pleasure in it, satisfaction. V'inyan chayatzlei. And the idea is living within him. It says in Yiddish, eslep ba'im that inyan, und es ist mit der starken Einig und Zufriedenkeit in Nefesh. So as I pointed out a number of times, when he brings Yiddish, it's to drive the point home. Sometimes the language is like saying something in a way more than Mama Loshen, the mother tongue. So it has a certain resonating element to it. I'll try to translate. But the content is what we just said. In Hebrew, The words are Yismach benafshe, Yisanig benafshe, and the Chayetzle. So he rejoices in it. Now, who rejoices in the idea? Only someone that really is immersed in it and loves it, in a sense. Is really taking it to heart. And that, of course, is going to lead to the midas, the birth, like he says, Ema bonim, to the midah of Ahaftas Hashem Elokecha. But this process, in other words, he's saying three things: Simcha benafshe, Einig benafshe, and living within him. So when you say it lives within him, doesn't mean just that it's alive. It means that it's lebedik. It's like you really feel a living organism. So the idea of Hashem Echad is not just a philosophical concept; it's something that you are experiencing, like a living experience. So you could, we know people can do mitzvahs anoshim alamada, can do mechanical mitzvahs, robotically, reflexively. That's not chai. When you say something is living by you, it means it's with vitality, it's dynamic. And you feel like it's alive right now. You're not just doing something by rote or something based on memory or due to obligation or due to the past, just to honor what our ancestors did. It's something alive. I was just, where was I? I just was interviewed. I forgot where it was. Oh, it was an interview for young people. And some of them are hosting Siddharim, Pesach. They're traveling and they're hosting a Seder in different places. So they asked me, what's the main thing they should know when they lead a Seder? I say, make sure it's alive. Not just going through rituals that we did, that we eat the matzah, we drink the wine, and we eat the myrrh, because once upon a time, it reminds us of things. That right now, make sure that everyone experiences Yetzias Mitzrayim right there by the Seder. And what does that mean? Mitzrayim from the Mitzarim v'Gvulim. Let everyone identify something that is a constraint in their life, whatever it may be, emotional, psychological, physical, something that is limiting them, something that their fears, insecurities, inhibitions, make it come alive, relevant to them right now, and show them how every part of the Seder is a living aspect of their lives. I'm just giving you an example. You could also do it mechanically. I mean, many Starim, unfortunately, just go through it, and that's that. Like a ritual, and it's a Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim, yeah. You may be even Yetzer with it all because you technically did everything, but is that called a living Seder? Like people go away and say, wow, that was an experience, So he's saying, Esleb Ba'im in Yiddish, let's translate the Yiddish, Esleb Ba'im, that's like Chai Etzlei, it's living within him, or by him, in him. That inyan leapt in them, und es ist mit a starken Einig, it's with a strong pleasure, und Zufriedenkeit in Nefesh, and an inner satisfaction in the soul. So this is what he's defining here as a true contemplation, the fullest sense of the word. By Deizeh, and when it's done in this way, Yi'eleidis Hamidah Shebelev. That will then assure that there'll be the birth of emotions in the heart. In our context, that will bring to V'ahavta as Hashem Elokecha, and not just remain a nice concept in the mind, cognitively, is Hashem Echad. Okay, but he has more to say on this, and it's a pretty, relatively speaking, the Rebbe Rashab is developing and elaborating. It's not as dense and condensed as other parts, so that's of course helpful. But let me stop if anybody wants to ask anything about what we just read.
Simcha is a happiness, is a midah. I mean, it's not one of the spheres, but it's an emotion.
Simcha is like chayes and einig in this context. It's not a midah.
That's my question. Okay.
It's not a midah. He's saying it's a way of contemplating. You can contemplate something in a dry, cold, detached, apathetic way, like he said earlier. You understand the idea, but it doesn't, there's nothing in it, there's no chayas and einig or simcha.
Thank you.
Yeah. Continuing on, Zeu b'tanai, this that we just said, that gives birth to the midas, this is on condition, kashera einik hu bizgalus belev, that the einik has to be revealed in his heart. Now, what he means is galus belev means that you're experiencing it. For example, to say that somebody, because a nefesh alikis has a fundamental connection to God, like he said before, there's be'etzem, we said in the parentheses, kol neshama l'kish tam ve'enik be'elikus, that's from birth. That's even when you're asleep. The whole point here is to, when we say Shema, the whole point is to make it a living experience in your life. Like we talked throughout. And the neshama comes down below, of course it's connected to God on its own. And it's rooted in the highest levels, but it's been subject to many concealments. And now it's inside of a body, and the animal soul, which further conceal the soul, and actually present all kinds of impediments and obstacles for the soul to be inspired, as, again, we don't need proof, just look at each of our lives. So therefore, the whole point here is that it should be bizgalus libe. I'm not sure if he means here libe, because libe says first comes the oineg that brings the midah shebelev, but he means that there's a palpable experience of this oineg. As long as the hergish, like you said before, you could be excited intellectually. People get excited about an idea, but as long as it's only in the mind, lo spilus alev, that will not come into a spilus alev necessarily, an excitement that is emotionally stimulating. Like we said, you could be intellectually inspired by it and even experience a measure of satisfaction. I think he said those words even. Let me just see the words he used. Nispol b'sichle elikus. Nispol, he said, which means excited, generally speaking. But it's not nimshach lalev. So the chayes ve'enig, what he's basically saying now, is the chayes ve'enig in the contemplation is essentially drawing the idea into an emotional realm, basically. And that in turn will give birth to Ava and Yira, or Avas Hashem, V'haftas Hashem Alekecha. That's what he's adding here. So that, okay. The Hergish b'moyach, hu hakoros ha'inyan. He's now explaining another parenthesis. It's around 6 lines. He's explaining a little more what's lacking when you only understand it. So he says, the hergish b'moyach, even when you feel in your mind a certain, you'll say fulfillment, even satisfaction. Nevertheless, hu hakoros ha'inyan, that is recognizing the idea. Shemakesh ha'inyan hu kach. I explained this already when I first taught it, the earlier page, but now he's spelling it out. He recognizes, and it's like a recognition, like a resonance, that this idea is so-and-so. Shezeu l'mayla ma'asogas ha'inyan. Cognition is barely ill. It's not just he understands the idea, but he's makir. Makir is a form of like recognition. Resonance is a good word, something like a resonating element to not just that you understand it. He said, like he explained earlier, that hakara is more than hasoga. I don't think he meant last page. Unless he meant the bottom of the page. Let me just see something. I think he means earlier. I have to find it. I'm not sure where he explained it, but he's saying, so when you the hergish and the moyach means that your sense, it's resonating in your mind, which is more than just understanding. Understanding is like a lower level. Hakara is a higher level. L'mayla ma'asogasin, Cognition is barely. Hinizeu b'chinas hadas shemechaber hachachma ima bina. This hakara is what's called Daas, that binds chachma to bina. So chachma is the concept, the nekuda, the spark of the idea. Bina is hasaga, comprehension. In that itself, there are levels. There's inner, there's outer dimension of comprehension. And Das binds them because Das is like hiskashus. I don't want to use hiskashus because you used that earlier, but here he's calling it hakara. Lias hasaga b'chinas pnimius yeser, causing the comprehension to be more b'pnimius. So in Tanya, he explains that Das is that binding yourself and much more concentration than Bina itself. That's what Das adds here. Here he's using the word hakara, which means recognition, resonance. And in general, this is the idea. He's explaining a little the process here. That what does this das do? It causes that there should be more pnimi coming from chachma to bina. Remember, chachma is concentrated and it's not developed, but that concentration has tremendous potency. Because chachma is like the nucleus, is like the seed, where everything is concentrated there. So the more you can bring from chachma to bina, the better the idea will be understood. So that's what he's adding here, that it causes that should be more pnimi should go from chachma to bina. Generally speaking, chachma bina does develop and flesh out ideas that are concentrated in the so-called point or nakuda of chachma, but there are many levels of that. It can be more and more and more. Here, he wants it to be not just comprehending and understanding, but a deeper recognition, like he said, primi yeser. Oi, another way of explaining it, so there's another thing that chachma offers, a type of hisamtus is the word. Bina is often compared to shmiya, to listening to something. Now you can listen to something and fully understand it. But Riyah adds an element of hisamtus, a deeper resonance. It's like you saw, seeing is believing. Ein adei mishmiya l'riyah. When you see something, so the Riyah is like, I've often pointed this out, the Chassidus explains it, that when you start breaking down, dissecting an idea of Chachma into Bina, yes, on one hand, you're going to have many more details. But those details could also weaken, and you can lose some of the integrity of the original idea, which is why Chassidus says one of the eitzes for that, solutions, is to always remember when you're brainstorming in Bina, always keep in mind, either write it down or put it on a board or some way, keep in mind the point of departure, where did it all begin? Because you can easily, Bina, just wander off and someone say, where are we? Where did we start? And sometimes you even forget what the original point was. So Riyah, Chachma is in a sense keeps you honest. It preserves the integrity of the core idea, even though it's not developed. But that's why you have, in many companies and many entities, you'll find they're excellent innovators. They conceive of ideas, but they're not necessarily good at fleshing it out, the nuts and bolts, so to speak. Others give them an idea and they'll come back to you with a whole plan. Every I, every T, every detail is broken down. But in that process, you could also sometimes say, 1 second, you missed the punchline, so to speak. So Chachma provides that level, what he calls Riyah. So one thing he says that Chachma is providing the Pnimi Yeser, but before he called Hakara. Now it's Riyah, Shezeh B'chinas HaChibur Momata L'mayla. U'kamei shekosav v'mokem acher. I am sure I discussed it the first time we learned it. I don't remember what I said then, but it sounds to me that the two ways here, one is like coming Mamayla Lamata from Chachman to Bina, that Daas connects Chachman to Bina, and then there's the other way around, that from Bina you get back to the Riyah of Chachman Matlamayla. That's what it sounds like he's saying, but it's so short. It's one word, Matlamayla. So I'd have to really give it some thought, or I'd go back to, if someone wants to go back to when I first explained it, it's hard for me to imagine I didn't discuss what this meant. But it's interesting anyway. But let's just finish the parentheses. All this is not midrash belev. Remember, he's explaining here in the parentheses that you have hergish in the mayach. We didn't talk about the tam v'einig or simcha that he spoke about in the process. That's an additional element. This is in the mayach itself. You could have just Bina. You could have Chachma and Bina connected through Das, which we call the Hakara, to the point that you have a deeper understanding. You have a visualization of it, which is a deeper resonance. But all this is not midrash belev. A person can have all this as a very good understanding, but it has nothing to do with you emotionally. Okay, so now he's saying that Das has another thing. This we learned actually, this I remember, the end of volume 2, we spoke about Das as connecting Chachma to Bina. That's one thing. Then Das has another thing. It connects Chachma, Bina, and Moichin to Midas. Because Das takes the idea, and that's what he's saying. This is a second aspect of Das. So the first aspect of Das does not necessarily lead to Midas. The second aspect of Das does. What does this Das do? It takes the Moichin, the idea now, and applies it to you. You're now feeling not just hargosha that the seichel, it resonates in the mind. That's still a cognitive experience. That it resonates, that it's good for you. That you feel it in your heart. So even though Das is not a midah, but Das has that element of concentration and what he called before his kashrus. Remember I said from Tanya, chapter 3, that Das is mekasher daite. That's why we say v'yoda es chava. It's an intimate understanding where you're taking the seichel and it's drawing it into application, subjective application to your feelings. So Das becomes a bridge between Meichen and Midas in that sense. But there's also Das in the earlier stages of the cognitive process. That's what he added in his parentheses. Obviously, there's a lot that can be said on this. There's a lot more. This is pretty dense and brief, but I think we covered it. So that's the parentheses.
Can you take a question?
Let me finish. Let me make sure I'm finishing the topic here. I just want to see where he's going next here. Okay. So now he covered, let me just see, 1 second. Yeah, like he said before, the Cognition Klolosinyan Ladis Hamidis Min Ameichen Idea Das Dafke. I may have skipped that line now that I'm thinking about it, to be honest. So let me read it now. I'm just going back a few lines. Before the parentheses, he said, okay, that is it's on condition for it to give birth to Midas, it's on condition that it be revealed in the heart. So he says, when you feel the inyan in your heart, and yeah, I think I skipped a line, by the way. And he feels this goodness in his heart, not just intellectually. That's when his heart will get excited. That I did read. When it's only in the mind, it won't be ispalas alev because, like you just said in the parentheses, the hergish b'mayach is only recognizing the truth of the idea, resonating, even riyah, even in a visual fashion, like he explained. But that's all still b'mayach. The dasha mechaber ameichin midas that he referred to earlier is basically taking the idea and take it down a level to make it that you are feeling now the goodness of it in your life. And that in turn will be awaken and stimulate and arouse the midos of Avas Hashem. So now, okay. I will stop here for questions. I just want to see one thing again. Okay. Any questions? Yeah.
Yes, please. I wanted to ask when you were saying the idea of using Chachma to keep Bina on track with the spark of the idea that doesn't sort of wander off into sort of mental meandering contemplations, but stays on point, which is part of enabling this Daas, binding Chachma to Bina. So on that concept that you described, that you explained, is that the same thing as Chacham Babina? We talked about Havim b'Chachma and Chacham Babina. Is this insistence that Chachma continue to drive the Bina? Is that Chacham or Chacham Babina? We talked. You understand the question?
Not really. Well, what are you asking me if what's what?
Okay, so a while back in a different context, we talked about how you need a little bit of Bina and Chachma to be able to even understand that spark of the idea itself. So that's like a Bina Haben b'Chachma, and then you said, and then we talked about this is just an understanding.
Bina, correct? Yeah, there is. That's correct.
So I'm asking if that concept that where it says here above, I can find the words, but generally you explained that in order to accomplish Das, to internalize the understanding of God into making it a personal experience, so you have to actually use Chachma in the Bina process, because if it's just Bina and it doesn't
I didn't say that. No, I didn't say that at all.
I thought you said to keep it on track, you have to keep the spark alive.
That's all intellectual. That has nothing to do with midas.
I didn't say midas.
Make sure that idea. That has nothing to do with midas. Let me tell you what I said. Let me clarify what I said.
My question isn't about midas. My question is only about
you just said to me about midas. I bring it into midas. You said
no. My question is about Chacham Babina.
So you asked me this. Elsewhere we learned there's Chachma Bina and Bina and Chachma. So the question is
this idea of keeping Bina on track using the Chachma, using the spark of the idea? So what's the idea? The idea is one God and everything.
Maybe. I'm not sure. It could be connected to that. Maybe it's not connected. There's different ways to explain it. There's the concept, even without Chachma within Bina and Bina within Chachma, there's the concept of connecting Chachma to Bina, which means that Bina, when you go into the details, make sure it's aligned with your original idea.
I see.
Another discussion of Bina within Chachma Bina. It could be part of it and help, but I don't know if it has to be.
If it's the same thing. I see. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
At least you were able to understand my question. Thank you.
Yeah. When you ask a question like you're just trying to connect things you've learned, or is there something missing in understanding here that you're trying to figure out?
The former. I was just
okay.
It occurred to me that sounded awfully like Chacham Babin, and I was trying to connect the concepts.
Bina Chachma has many different functions, which is not for here to discuss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But okay, good.
Yeah. Are
there any other questions?
But your explanation here is phenomenal. I had 10 notes on the first quarter of the top page. So that's very clear. I was just bringing something that we learned a long time ago and trying to connect it here.
I understand. Okay, continuing on then. Kamoy Kane, where Rashab is really going into detail here. Kamoy Kane, so too, I was trying to figure out what the so too is, but I think what he wants to say, that till now we were talking about the einig, like in the general contemplation, but now he's talking about shabasoga pnimius. That so too, when you have a deeper understanding, shazeo b'derech klal b'chinas pnimius bina canal. That in general is pnimius bina, like he said at the end of the parentheses on the end of previous page. At the bottom of the previous page, if you recall, said, so there's an einig, like we said, the more you go deeper into the topic, the more pleasure you gain. If this deeper understanding would remain only on the cognitive level in the mind, Lo yeh mizeh leidos hamidus. From this will not come the birth of emotions. Remember, emotions, again, is my experience of it, not just my understanding of it. We could understand many things, but midas is my experience of it. And this, I put it on a very basic and balabatisha level. How often do you find, or you accuse someone else, and you understand the idea, but I don't see you relating to it emotionally. Very often we can understand something, but it doesn't affect us personally. That's why very often we are very good at giving advice, but we don't take that advice to heart, literally to heart. Because whatever reason, there's a cutoff between Mayach and Midas, Meichin and Midas. So there are people who understand things brilliantly, but they're lacking an emotional connection. I mean, you find as there are even, unfortunately, cognitive dissonance, and even certain illnesses, whether it's a certain form of Asperger's or the spectrum, what they call autism, where a person can brilliantly understand something, but for some reason it doesn't go to their heart. Now, I'm not talking about. I don't want to talk about that person, that per se. Just giving an example, because it's not their fault. Not something you can expect, because whatever reason, it's a chemical thing, or however they try to understand autism and so on. But I'm just pointing out that understanding something is not automatically feeling it and relating to it. I mean, on a much harsher level, you have sociopaths and psychopaths who they say simply don't have a conscience or don't have a feeling. And that's why they can do things that are very aggressive and very sadistic, because they're lacking a certain sensitivity that most people have that would never behave a certain way, because we all have certain emotional feelings, compassion, empathy, and so on. And I don't want to really take it, I'm not trying to clinically try to define, I'm just trying to give examples that now, what he is talking about here is more something that is in our control, where you're contemplating on something, but it remains an abstract idea. I mentioned the distinction between Bertrand Russell's response and the Rambam about wisdom. So Bertrand Russell said, I teach mathematics and I'm not a triangle. And the Rambam says, what you teach is who you are, and who you are is what you teach, meaning your behavior absolutely reflects on your wisdom. A wise person is also recognizable in their behavior. Whereas classic, you have the abstract or theoretical scientist who says, don't look at my behavior. It's not about my behavior. I understand the idea. Just like a doctor can tell you that smoking kills, but he could be smoking himself. He's telling you the concept. I'm telling you what's right. I'm telling you what science says. Don't look at my behavior. Don't look at my own experiences. There are people that can preach and talk about something, about ethics, or refinement, and they themselves are completely not refined. This, of course, extreme examples of cognitive dissonance, but on a more subtle level, which is what he's talking about here, that you can understand something well. No one is saying you don't understand it. I mean, I gave the most grotesque example, maybe the Nazis. You had tremendous scientists and doctors who were, Rahman al-Islam, experimenting on live human beings without anesthesia and without anything. How can a person do that? And they were scientists. It was all in the name of science. Kavyachol. So there you have a perfect example of a mind being detached from emotions, a mind being detached, for that matter, from ethics and morality and so on. Again, I'm using all these examples just to drive the point home. Here, clearly, he's not talking about necessarily those extremes, but on a more subtle level, you could have this understanding, Saga Pnimis, Im Tia B'meichel V'aloyim Zeh Leidos Hamidus. Leidos Hamidus means that you are emotionally involved. You're not just a bystander. You're not just watching. You're involved. There are people I remember coming to Farbrengen, especially in the early years, and they came to observe. They came to watch, like a sightseer. You're coming? I'm doing some sightseeing. You're a tourist. My father often would ask people I brought home as a guest, he says, are you a tourist or a resident? He didn't mean whether they live there. He means, are you just passing through and watching? Like people go on a tour in a museum. Doesn't mean they're experiencing it personally. They're watching their voyeurism, living vicariously through watching it. And then there's experiencing it. And experiencing is what he's talking about, Leidus Hamidus. It's not just that God is one, you love God. V'haftas Hashem Elokecha is very different than just the knowledge and the understanding of Hashem Echad. Leidus Hamidus. Ki'im, kasher einig bob is galus. The lev dafke. When that pleasure is not just an intellectual pleasure, but comes is galus alev, the hainu shalev misanig. He's repeating again the heart is taking pleasure, taking satisfaction. V'chai ba'inyan aliki. Again, he says, and is living with it. V'chai b'hem. You should live with it. Ba'inyan aliki hamusig. In the senior key that he understood, umeir etzlei, and it radiates, it shines by him. U'kamoy be'esa simcha, like during a celebration, a simcha. She'ozu is galus hamidus b'yeser. You're dancing at your child's wedding, or another person that's close to you. You're not just coming to watch the wedding, or you're just coming as a guest who was invited. You're sameach in the be'esa simcha. His galus hamidus b'yeser, by a simcha you see, and this is a classic example in Chassidus, that even people who are very intellectual and there's a certain free abandon, you can say. His galus hamidus b'yeser, a person's emotions, the doors open up, the channels open up, the floodgates of emotions open. Kamoy lefazer hein rav ukahai gavna. So this is an example used in Chassidus, that a melech, a king, or someone, a wealthy person, or any person in a simcha, they're ready. Lefazer means they splurge. Hein rav, tremendous. Hein can be a treasure. Can be, in other words, they're not limiting the flow of whatever it is that they're giving, whether it's food, drink, celebration. Whether some people it's gifts. So the lefazer hein rav ukahai gavna ad shegam beish achili va'akamsen, to the extent that even a stingy person, chili and kamsen, they both really synonymous. I have to look up what their actual differences, but they both refer to a stingy, miserly type of person. B'yeser, even someone who's very stingy, is galus midas hachesed. During a simcha, even a person like that, there'll be a revelation of chesed, to the point that you look at him, you'll see a different person. He's not the same person as he is regular. Like it says elsewhere. Now, just for the record, when Chassidus brings this, it says, but we see some people even during a simcha, they're not that way. So there Chassidus says there may be something that's not completely healthy about the person, but a person who's truly besimcha, especially the simcha of a child, even a nature that's usually more, let's call it withholding, that's a mild term. Here he's using more literally the word stingy, kamsen, someone that is a stingier person, that there'll be a change in their personality during that simcha, not necessarily permanently. So all this tells you why, because the simcha is my simcha. It's not an intellectual experience. It's a personal experience. That's dafka when the simcha is bizgalas belev. Maybe that would explain why some people don't have that. Maybe because by them, they're not allowing themselves to really enjoy. There's some people just have that problem. Where the simcha is bizgalas belev, kamoy kain dafka kasher tainug belev. So that's simcha, the same thing, the tainug that's in his heart. Oz yeh ladies bizgalas hamidah belev. Then there'll be the birth and the revelation of the midah shebelev. There's more on this topic, but I think I'm going to stop here. I'll just add one more thing. This is a mashal from one of the big chassidim. I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it is... Oh, I forgot the name right now. It's actually a mashal on Daas. But the Daas that he's talking about here, that brings it into Midas. I mentioned this mashal. It's a very good mashal for this topic. The famous one where There was a time when there were many illiterate people and they couldn't read, unfortunately. So they would hire what they called a reader. So if you needed someone to read for you, you'd hire them. They'd come and read a letter or whatever. So a guy got a letter, received a letter in the mail, couldn't read it, but the letter had very bad news in it. And the news was, as the guy started reading for him, he hired someone to read it. And in the middle of the letter, they're notifying him, God forbid, that his father passed away. The one who received the letter. As soon as, of course, that happens, he begins crying and becoming very emotional. The person who's reading the letter, he stays calm and he's ready to continue reading whenever the listener is ready to listen. So the question is asked, why did he cry? Why didn't he crying? So the way the Chassid put it, he said, "Was sein Tate." It's his father. The reader is just a hired gun. Like I said before, he's just a tourist, not his father. So he may empathize with the person, but it's not his father. And that explains the difference between Daas and Chachma and Bina. In context of Daas bringing it, Chachma and Bina is the reader. He understands. He knows exactly what he knows how to read. He knows what it said. He knows it's even sad. He understands that this is a sad event. The person, God forbid, passed away. But it didn't come to his midas. It's nothing to do with his midas because it's not him, not his father. The other person can't read. It doesn't have the same level of literacy, but it's his father, and that's negei benefesh, negei belibe. Obviously, this is a negative example, but you could also use it in a positive example. Let's say he got a letter about the birth of a child or another simcha. The same thing. The person reading, it's not his. So this is an example of difference between understanding something and knowing its truth. And again, we're not saying you don't know it's true. We're not talking about that the hasaga is distorted or false. It's just not hasaga that brought it to a personal experience. Just wanted to add that into the equation. I think it's pretty clear, but still, the more explanation, the better, frankly. I'll stop here, even though there's more to go, and I'd like to finish it already, but let's just do it more. We'll do it a little patiently and get the whole picture. There's a few more points I see he wants to make until we get to the end of the next paragraph where he's going to go back to the Va'ahavta. But this is all coming to explain, remember, why Krishma is diffshi. You need it to be sweet like honey. It's not enough just to say Shema. That's ultimately where he's going with this. So we'll get there. So I'll stop where I am right here. I guess the 2/3, 3/4 of the way down, page 1452. Any questions?
I think it's attributed to the altar of Kelm, which was Rabbi Simcha Zissel Ziv.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Oh, the mashal was attributed to the altar of Kelm, Rabbi Simcha Zissel Ziv.
No, at least the way I heard it's a Chabad Chassid who lived the time of, I'm not sure, I think Tzemach Tzedek. Maybe he also said it. I don't know. I didn't hear it in his name.
Okay.
I have to look it up. I have it here in one of the Sfarim. I know where to find it. I'll give you the name next class.
Okay. I just thought I was being clever with ChatGPT.
No. Oh, that's what they wrote. That's what they write?
That's what it came up with.
Okay.
Never know. It says he was a major figure in the Musar movement.
Yeah. There are a lot of things that were said by Chassidim that I guess either others attribute to others, or maybe they heard it, or maybe different people said the same idea. Could be.
I'm curious. Sorry,
Yeah.
I don't know if you wanted to continue commenting on Rick's. It was an interesting insight. Yeah, maybe the Misnagdim stole the saying from Rakasa. Rick, the Musar movement is totally not Chassidic. That's sort of the foundational, original, like prior to Chassidus, who resisted Chassidus. So it's definitely not a Chabadnik. The rabbi that you mentioned.
Yeah, but fine. I mean, I've heard many things that I myself heard from the Rebbe or from other or read from the other Rebbeim. Sometimes others take credit for it, or they, sometimes it's not for great motives either. They don't want to give credit to maybe the source, so they find whatever. I'm not going to judge anyone here.
I had a question about the learning here. And I don't. Okay, so but it comes to a question on Shaila and the Malachim. So that it seems that in this, regarding this particular sugya here about how to internalize and personalize your contemplation of in Shema to make it emotional, not just cognitive. So in that, relative to this concept, the Malachim don't have what to demonstrate to us. They can show us the intensity and the loyalty, the fealty and the bittul that one would need to bring into the contemplation. But would you agree that because I'm thinking about Ya Achalti Ya'ari Difshi, I was trying to connect, like, okay, where do the Malachim come into this concept of internalizing the understanding and making it emotional? But would you agree that in this sense, the Malachim are not connected to this because they don't have emotion? They're just completely bittul, mevutal. So what would be your comment?
First of all, the Malachim absolutely have emotions. They have Ava V'yira. That's the whole point. That's why they experience what they experience. And they're the ones that carry Ava V'yira. He said, Malach Machal is Ava, Malach Gavriel is Yira. So they are the Ava V'yira in those levels. Whether it's connected to what we're learning right now, I would say to some extent, yes, based on what he said earlier, that before you get to Krishma, there's the Hagdama of the Malachim, of Birchis Yetzer, where we talk about their Ava V'yira, which helps the Nefesh Habamis and the Nefesh Elokis both prepare for Shema. Here, however, he's talking already Shema. The main bulk of the Avodah, like he said, the Ikar Avodah is in Shema, which leads to Vahafta. But we need the Malachim beforehand to help us get to this level. So ultimately, Vahafta Hashem Lekacha is with us, like all support. Let's just go back, not be mathematical here. All of us have many people in our support system. If someone asks you, if you achieved something in your life, and you'll say, who do you give credit to? You'll say, most likely, several people. Could be parents, could be educators, siblings, teachers, rabbis, the Rebbe, Siddur. So if someone says you have Avos Hashem, let's say one day saying Shema, and you say, I have many elements that contributed to helping me get to this Avos Hashem. And one of them could also be the Malachim. And I would say they are. So I look at it more like you have to think of it as a support system. And then comes to the actual Avodah of Shema, like he said, the Ikar Avodah is when we start contemplating Hashem Echad. But that comes after the introduction and the Siyua and the support of the Malach.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
So let me flip it. Just incidentally, do the Malachim have cognition, or are they just pure?
They have cognition too.
Uh-huh.
There's a thing called Hasagas HaMalachim. In Bria, Malachim in Yitzira, Malachim in Asi. They don't have free will. They don't have a guf and nefesh habamis, if that's what you're looking for.
No. Exactly what you said. Cognition, Hasagas HaMalachim. Huh.
Yeah.
So they have a full infrastructure of sechel and midos, just not the way we do, because they're not embodied.
They have no free will, and they have no body and animal soul to deal with. So they're more just natural. They're natural, so-called, we call ambassadors, ministers of God. That's why they're God's supervisors. God's. That's why they're a support system.
Yeah. But they have.
It's the neshama that is the center of existence, that fulfills the purpose for which God. Everything else are support.
I completely understand that. This is maybe 2 degrees of standard deviation away from where we're learning here, but as long as we're talking about cognition and mentation and emotion, thinking and feeling, and we're talking, then we ask about the Malachim. Do they have a fully built out infrastructure of cognition and emotion in terms of like the Esther Spheros? Do Malachim?
Why not? Why not?
I'm not saying they don't. It's just something I hadn't thought about ever, really.
Yeah, I mean, if to go look in the actual Maimorim to see if it states it quite in those words or different words, but they are everything in existence has the 10 spheres in them. Even a stone, even a tzameach and a chai they're all created by the 10 spheres.
Right.
So malachim that have cognition, more than a daimim, than just a mineral, they all are made of this. The question is what's prominent, which spheres are prominent. Like, for example, we say in Atzilus, Chochmah is the most prominent. In Bria, Bina is the most prominent. In Yetzirah, Mides are most prominent. And Asiya, the Nehi is most prominent. So it all comes down to what's the dominant feature.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah. I would even say that Malachim, I think I mentioned this, are a step below the spheres, are divine attributes. The Malachim are already created entities, but they represent these divine attributes. Michal is a name of a Malach, but he represents Chesed. Gavriel represents Gvura. Rifal represents Tiferes, etc. By the way, there's a sefer called Malachi Elyon by Rab Reuven Margolius, where he collects from all Chazal, from everywhere, all Malachim, all their names in alphabetical order, positive Malachim, negative ones, male, female, etc. If you're interested.
What's it called again? The book?
Malachi Elyon.
By Rob
Angels.
Reuven Margolius.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
He's a I mean, he passed away in the 60s, but the Rebbe had his forum, and the Rebbe referred to him, sent people to see him. He was a very interesting author of many works where he compiled things. He, for example, wrote the Zohar the Rebbe used, and many of us use, is called Zohar Margolius because it's his edition. It's the Zohar where he cross-references the Zohar with all of Chazal and Shas. So he was
a real maven.
So like anything that says in the Zohar, if it says somewhere in Shas, he cross-referenced. He has Svarim, Shari Zohar, a whole list of Svarim that I could. They're all very, very useful, especially in the area of cross-referencing and so on. Okay, we'll stop here. As I said, closer to the bottom of page 1452. Let's stop.